My name is Carlos Walker, and this is Art and Hustle, Black Authors Matter. And today we have Miss Barbara Howard with us. How you doing, Miss Howard?
I'm doing great. It's good to be here. Thanks for having
Hey,
me on.
I am grateful to have you. So, if you will, before we start, tell them who you are and what you do.
I'm Barbara Howard Phipps. I write under the pen name Barbara Howard, and I write mysteries, clean mysteries, so there's no explicit sex, no graphic violence, no profanity, but there is a dead body somewhere in the story. So it has to be, the murder has to be solved. So those are the stories. And I always weave in a lot of romance because that's what we want to have some love in the middle of all the tragedy as well.
Well, I don't think I've ever asked anyone, how long have you been writing these books?
I started writing as a child, but I didn't start my self publishing journey until 2020 because, as we know, the pandemic came through and it made everyone take some time and think things through, and it was basically, if I don't do this now, when am I going to ever do it? And so I started as an indie publisher in 2020. I have two book series out. Um, so I'm plugging away at it.
Hey, and we are fraternity members, so hey,
We
look.
are.
So, if you will, share with me the inspirations about your books and I guess you could say what they're about. Even though we know they're murder mysteries or mystery series, tell me about how many books do you have?
I have I have nine. There are three in each series, and then I have a few short stories out there that have been in anthologies. So yeah, that's. But I write short fiction, which means they're about 40,000 words. I like
Okay.
people like to be able to get in and out of a story. Sometimes if they see something really big and thick, they won't touch it. So yeah,
So,
my.
if you will, break down the series down for me. Like start at the first one, and then we'll go through the second and the third.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. Thank you. Well, you asked me the inspiration and what's behind the stories, and that's a really good question because um to be honest with you, Carlos, I struggled with it a little bit because I can talk to you, you're a Christian, I'm a Christian, uh born again, spirit filled Christian, and I'm writing about, murders. you know so I kind of struggled with it for a minute, but I chatted with my pastor about it, and she said even though it's fiction, God can still use it. So I went forward with it, and what I learned along the way was people need to be the hero,
Mm-hmm.
and when they take on the character. My first series just started with a young woman. I'm gonna hold up the cover because you taught me always bring your books with you. So like wherever I am, I'm gonna have my books with me. But anyway, so this is Tracy,
Okay.
and it's her story basically. And when people, her backstory is she aged out of foster care. She's a loner. She's just trying to get her place settled in the world. And along the way, she comes across an urban farm, and there are these people working on this farm, and there's this young boy at 14 years old. And in the real world, people look at a 14-year-old black boy and think that he's a young man. But because of who she is, she can look at him and say, why is this boy in the middle of this farm working with all these grown-ups? Like something about that is out of place. It says, so her heart connects with him. And then along the way, a few days later, while she's still trying to, she'd been fired from her job, she's trying to get another job, all that sort of thing. And she meets the woman who owns the farm. All of my characters are black or Hispanic. Um, and the woman who owns the farm ends up being murdered.
Okay.
So Tracy's concern is what's going to happen to all these people. They're going to be homeless, and especially what's going to happen to this young boy. And so that's why she kind of starts to snoop around and figure out what happened. And I introduced a black police officer. I wanted a good cop in the story. And by the end of the first story, she solves what happened. There's some love interest between Tracy and Randall, the cop. And then in book two, we continue on with their story. They're getting to know each other, and then dun dun dun, the enemy comes in and tries to destroy everything, and they have to persevere. And there's by book three, let me hold that up because what happened, people started asking me whatever happened to Milo, the 14-year-old boy, and this is Milo.
Okay.
And so they were like, whatever happened to him? Because that was what started everything. And so book three is called Milo's Journey. So by book three, Tracy and Randall are married with a baby, and Milo is learning his way, finding his way. They got him to, a good guardian to take care of him, and he's starting his own business and bought his first house. So I wanted to give him a happily ever after, right? So that was kind of what I wanted to do with the story. I wanted to take this young woman who has had some hard times in her life and show how even though she had to be guarded and armored up whenever facing the world, she could still have a warm, caring heart and still, not turn away. Sometimes especially when we had a lot of that social unrest happening in 2019, 2020, like there was a lot going on. And I wanted to show that there was still some kindness, even though people were struggling, and even in her struggles, she couldn't just turn and walk away from the situation. Like she saw something going on and it was like she couldn't rest until she got to the end of it, and made sure that everybody was okay. And that's her story through these three books. The first three books is her story from going from being a loner and not trusting people, having major trust issues, and at the same time fighting through all of that with her anxiety and everything coming along with her. So when people look at her story or walk through her eyes, by the end of everything, the funny thing about the human brain is we can go through these imaginary places and still physically experience them, right? And so when she comes out on top, you feel like you came out on top. When she
Mm.
solved the mystery, you feel like you solved the mystery, and you can be a hero today because you were in the story with her and you solved the mystery. So that's my take on why I continue doing it. And when I had especially young Black women, young adult Black women who read the story and related to her, or um, felt like, the moral of the story is it doesn't matter how you start, it's how you finish, that sort of thing. So I think there's enough tragedy out there. There is an appetite for retelling traumas, retelling these stories and putting trauma on first on blast and everything. But I think that you can still tell a story um that alludes to these situations without having to put it like in your face.
Yeah. It can start off with trauma, but it doesn't have to end. Like
Right.
just using I guess you could say the African American story. It did start off in trauma. Look at us now. And while there may be some traumatic things still going on, I can tell you how this people have grown and how the things have became way better, but how they created better, how they created almost every invention that you can think of that we still use now. And
Yes.
while we don't, while we didn't know at one point, I always love to say thank God that white people put document almost everything because they told the truth, even though that they probably didn't mean to. Such and such created this. Such and such created this. They said the reason why I started this was because they always said You want to hide something from a black person, put it in a book.
Oh my. Yeah, I've heard that.
And guess what? Thank God they put stuff in books because hey, now we know we created it all.
That's right.
And that's the biggest part. So just move forward. Your second series.
Okay. The second series, and let me come back to something that you just said though,
What?
because um so much of what we carry as a people, we carry in oral stories. You know,
Yes.
because they didn't have books to read, so we had to carry our history and our family stories orally and pass those stories down. And I was talking to a friend of mine about, I said, I think that we have, in my personal opinion, I'm no expert, but from what I've observed, we have content creators, people who just want to create something to sell as a commodity. And then you have storytellers,
Mm-hmm.
people who have that gift of wanting to, you could walk down the street. I watch you on IG. You know I'm always up on your IG. And like you could be like walking down the street in front of a, in front of a restaurant and tell a story. Like you can pick a story out of heaven and just share it with somebody and get a point across. And so I think that that's one of the things that we as an African American community, we embrace storytellers,
Yes.
because it's part of how we maintain our personal history and educate one another, is by sharing our stories. And I think it's key that like you take what your experience was. I never walked in your shoes, but I can pick up a book and I can see what your life story has been so far and what you aspire to do and how you're changing lives, the people that you meet even to this day, based on what you experience. So I think that like the major thing behind writers who are storytellers, right? And I gravitate towards storytellers because of that. So it's like what you said. We had to do it. Um, and in my books, I tend to add because everything is made up. I don't put anybody in a real city like Chicago or Detroit or DC or anything. Like they're all made up cities and everything. Um, but in there, I always refer to either a family name or a street name that came out of a street name from, a town where a family member met. So I'm like trying to carry my ancestors with me, even into these imaginary stories, right?
I
And
love
I put a quilt in a story because I'm a quilter. You see the fabric like
it.
hanging up there.
Okay.
So that's my design board. So I put a quilt in the story, like little bits and pieces of my life or my family, even though these are imaginary places, I try to sprinkle them in there that no one else knows that they're there but me, but it's like I'm bringing everybody with me in these books. Um, so the second series, not to be long-winded, feel free to cut me off because I will. If you invite me on, there will be no dead air. I will fill up the. Um, the second series, I have a young woman. Again, uh, her name is Amira Cooper, and you can't see her on this cover, but this is the cover because I always carry my books called "The Trace of Rain." She is a college student, and she is working as a health aide in a nursing home. And she meets an elderly white woman who's very wealthy, and no one understands why this woman is in this nursing home. She just kind of showed up, and she doesn't talk to anyone but Amira. And she believes her husband's death was not accidental. She believes it was a murder. And Amira sticks her nose in it, tries to sort out what happened. And by the end of book one, Amira's love interest is a young black man who has started his own um, counseling and mediation firm to help in the community. He's an attorney. And so she wants, he's her crush. She's like, yes, let's do this. We're going to make the world a better place, all that sort of thing. And so his focus is on building up this mediation services firm in the community. But in the meantime, she's also trying to help this elderly, wealthy white woman. So, like, how do you make sense out of this, right? Um, but by the end of book one, they sort out what happened to the woman. Her name is Claire Stewart. Sort out what happened to her husband. He had owned a restaurant, so this woman's restaurant was kind of in the middle of it too. And we sort out some family issues with Amira and her sister in book one. So by book two, we turn to, let me get the cover. We turn to it's called The Spice Code. That's this
Okay.
one. You can kind of see there's a woman's face back
Yeah.
there. So Amira's cousin Raphael, he's Hispanic, had started off living in his car with a food truck, eventually got a diner, and his aspiration is to work for this executive chef who he is going to retire, and he wants to work with him at this four-star restaurant and really like make it big. Like that's his big thing. And he meets a woman who says that she is the operations manager of this restaurant. She's going to help him prepare and, meet Chef Dakota and do all of these fantastic dishes and impress him and get him in there and get him established and all that sort of thing. And she's lying. She's lying. She's lying. That's not who she is. She's actually a murderer. So
Mm,
so he gets deceived into believing that this woman is helping him. And he puts all of his money into all this new, importing these ingredients and doing all these wonderful things in his diner to add staff and everything because he's preparing for this career that this woman has promised him. And the truth is, she's just looking for fame and fortune for herself. In the meantime, Amira's boyfriend is focused in on his career. He doesn't really have time for her. So they're struggling a little bit. And there's a murder. And there's another attorney who gets framed for the murder.
mm,
And so Amira has to, of course, she and her best friend who works for a tabloid, she works for one of those gossip magazines, and her name is Harper. And Harper is always snooping around and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And everyone is saying Harper is the problem. No one wants to talk to her. No one wants her around because he's always digging in people's trash and digging up scandals and get her out of here. And Amira and Harper are like ride and die buddies. So they sort it out and they figure out who killed this woman in the story. And it was the
hey,
girlfriend of her cousin, and then they had to sort out what happens to the cousin because he was about at bankruptcy. And so there's a fundraiser. They make up the money to get him out of trouble and help him out. So there's always a happy ending. I mean,
I
there is a
love it.
murder mystery, but there's always a happy ending.
Remember,
in,
you trying to create superheroes. You want people to feel good at the end of the book, not
yeah,
just see all the gloom or certain parts. You want love. Look, you are something that we need. I like to say we are all the main characters of our story.
yeah.
And when you learn that you are, it's then that you use that power to inspire. You're an inspiration, especially with your books.
Thank,
The way your mind thinks.
thank you, thank you. I appreciate that. Um, People always ask like where the inspiration comes from and all that sort of thing, but I think if you just observe life
Hmm.
around you, you can see bits and pieces, like you said, of other people's stories or experiences out there or the headlines, um, and somehow you can weave that into some kind of story that brings people along and to a happy ending. Yeah, to a happy ending.
So, if you will, because I know you got a third book on that one,
Yeah.
but let's move it forward to your third series. Briefly, just tell me about that, because I'm trying to make sure I keep them kind of compact. But
Okay.
tell me about your third series.
The third series actually. is kind of pulling away from the I'm going to say there may be a few curse words in there. There may not be. I don't know. Still working on it. But so it's more of a suspense, and it's how can I say it? There's a woman who it listen, I used to live and work in the DC area at the Pentagon for like 12 years, and then also on Capitol Hill, and then down there in Georgetown and all that kind of stuff. So like I have like all this corporate life left behind. And I think that a lot of those experiences are going to come through in this story. So it's not going to be this small town, situation. It's going to
Like
be more of a corporate suspense. This young woman is working for a corporation, and her boss has his girlfriends, ex-girlfriends, have been like turning up dead.
mm,
And she's her role in her position is to always make sure that he is untouched by any scandal. He's untouched by any problems. She's his gatekeeper and all that sort of thing. And at the same time, she's positioning herself so that when he takes over the corporation, she's going to be like right there with him. So she's protecting him for her own interest. But along the way in the story, she finds out that he has someone else in mind, and so now she has to exact her revenge, and she enlists a hacker to tie the deaths of these ex-girlfriends to her boss to try to take him down. Dun dun dun. So
I like the way this one goes. I like all of them, but this one has a lot more. I guess you could say decency in it.
yeah. So that's what I mean. Like, this is not going to be one of those little small town college students, happily ever after. This is going to be a little more. You better watch your back because you don't know where Samantha's going to show up, and yeah. So I'm going to pull on some experiences. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
So, if you will, before we go, and just let you know, I love your hair too.
Oh,
You look
thank you.
very beautiful.
Thank.
So if you will, tell them where they can find your books, where they can find you on your social media platforms and everything. Because I want to make sure that they go get your material. Please, y'all, go and support Miss Barbara Howard. Look, this is my fraternity member.
Thank.
She's an amazing person. Like she said, she always support me. Look, I promise you. Look, and I want y'all to please go support her.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's easy to support you because you always bring in all that love and all that positive energy. I mean, you throwing out the lifeline. The world is dark and dangerous, and people are hyper vigilant all the time because you never know what's going to happen next, whether it's on the news or on your block. So coming on your page, is an honor to be on your page, because coming on your page, you always bring in something that's going to lift people up and remind them, who they are, and that you see and love them. That's amazing to me. So it's easy to support you. But thank you for your kind words. Um, Everyone can find me at authorbarbarahoward.com. All my stuff's over there. Um, on IG, I'm Barbara Howard. I'm B Howard Phipps, Phipps. On all the socials, you'll find me as Barbara Howard. And let me say this, because I'm on Carlos' page. If you all go to my website and go to my contact page and send me a message on my contact page and tell me, just say Carlos Love, and I've got like 3 codes for a free audiobook. So if some people don't like to read, people like to listen. So for my first book with Tracy, I have 3 codes I can give you guys, first come, first serve. And you can just listen to Tracy's story on the first book, which is Final Harvest, that I was talking about. So come to my page on my website, my contact page, put in that you heard me on Carlos' page, and I got 3 codes for y'all. Just to share the love, right? To continue passing it forward and paying it forward. But yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm
And
I'm uh,
and
I'm out.
last thing, give them a word of wisdom.
Ooh, Lord, am I prepared, Jesus? Um, I'm going to say this then. When I was a child, man, it, cut me off if you got to cut me off. But when I was a child, my parents took me to the World's Fair, and there was a space capsule. When I was a little girl, I always wanted to be an astronaut. Among things, I wanted to go into space. And so the space village was like the big draw to me. Like they had all the Disney stuff and everything, but I wanted to be where the astronaut stuff was. And they had a space capsule there, and I went in the space capsule, and you could hear they had the audio recording from NASA, so you could hear it just like it actually happened. And like that was the biggest thing in my life. Like that was huge to me. And then over my life growing up, I convinced myself, I mean, it was a replica, of course. I mean, they who would let like a kid mess with something like this? So it was something, they made a statue of it or whatever, and they put it on display. And recently, this month, my cousin's kids were down in Orlando, somewhere in Florida, and they got to look at some rockets and stuff. And I said, "Hey, I used to want when I was her age, I wanted to be an astronaut too, but it was fake, but it was still fun." Don't you know she contacted her mother, who contacted her mother, my aunt, and my aunt who took us there said, "No, it was real." And I said, "What?" She said, "No, they found out later that it actually was real." So I went and looked it up, and they literally decades later were taking it apart to refurbish it and recognized that it was really the space capsule that Scott Carpenter rotated around the Earth 4 times in, and splashed it. It was the real thing. It was the real thing. And I told my aunt, I said, "You don't know how much you blessed me by telling me, reviving that in me that I actually touched and was part of this real thing that really happened, that a real astronaut was in, and it was really in space, and it really splashed down. It was really, and I was in it." And so, the takeaway of that for me is, when you're going through that span of your life, don't lose that thing that sparked you. Like that was huge to me. And somewhere along the line, the enemy, the world, your family, your friends, your boss, everybody will convince you that it's not real. That thing that was in you from your childhood that you wanted to do or wanted to be, or where you wanted to go, or what you wanted to accomplish. And people will convince you it's not real. You can't have it. No one's going to give you that. No one's going to give you access to that. You're never going to be able to get to that point. You're never going to be able to climb that mountain. You don't want to wait decades later to find out you could have had it, you
Mm.
know? So when you look at your life, and sometimes it's hard because there's so much that gets piled on you with responsibilities and experiences and tragedies. But if you can get to a quiet space, your nervous system needs a place to be still. So if you could just be still long enough and say, "No, this is really who I am, and this is really what I can have," and don't let anyone convince you that you can't.
So thank you for joining me. It is an honor to have done this.
Thank you
Uh,
so.
I'm grateful that God gave me the idea because I have met right now 19, even though me and you already conversed, but I've met 19 authors and I got to share and listen to their books, listen to why they are an inspiration or what they was inspired by. And I thank you for being a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's an honor. So for each and every one of y'all, once again, please go purchase her books. You then heard the series. I think they would inspire you. This is Art and Hustle. This is Miss Barbara Howard, and I am Carlos Walker. Peace and blessings. Love each and every